Number 1. The barn. The strangest thing I can recall ever happening was something that happened with my daughter at a very young age. We were renting a house that had an old barn out in the backyard. We told our kids to stay out of the barn, but you know how children can be. When they want to get in and figure something out, they'll do it. When you tell them not to do it, it'll make them want to do it even more. So it wasn't a big surprise for us that our kids were getting into the barn, so we made sure that there wasn't anything dangerous in there that could hurt the kids. So whenever we found out that they were in there, it wasn't a big deal to us, as it would have been before. Our 8-year-old daughter, though, one day sort of scared us. She told us that while she was out in the barn, someone had said hello and how are you to her. She also said that it was a pleasant-sounding voice and that she wasn't scared. But that didn't keep her dad and I from worrying, so we went out to search the barn and make sure there was no one in there, and we found absolutely no one. My husband had a really odd idea. He thought our daughter might have had an imaginary friend. I thought that the age of 8 was a bit too old for that to happen, or two older children never even had one. But he thought maybe because they were boys, and they always played together when they were young. So it became a thing that we heard about once in a while. We would occasionally hear about her being in the barn, and hearing someone say only those two phrases to her. I admit that I found that very odd, and actually thought it showed the lack of imagination that my girl had with her imaginary friend. But not everyone can be imaginative, so I guess that wasn't a big deal. It wasn't until one day that I was looking for my daughter that something really strange happened. I figured, after looking for her throughout the house, that she was probably out there in the barn, so I went out there to check in on her. Sure enough, she was out there with some of her dolls playing. I went up to her and told her it was time for lunch, and she had to come in and wash up. It was then that I very clearly heard a strange voice say, "Hello," and after a while, "How are you?" I can't really explain how I felt. It was shocking, and I really mean that. There was like a jolt of electricity that went through my body, and my daughter was happy that finally, someone other than her had finally heard the voice. A little more than scared, I took my daughter and we got out of the barn. I was worried that someone had been hiding out in the barn and that we hadn't just found them the last time. So I got in touch with my husband at work and he suggested that I call the police. Well, I did call the police and I told them I heard someone talking in the barn. I explained everything that had been going on, and they did come out and they checked out the barn. My daughter was a bit distressed for some reason, like she thought her friend was going to get into some sort of trouble. I wasn't sure what to do to make her feel better. I waited and watched out the kitchen window. I kept expecting the cops to come out with some crazy guy in handcuffs, but that didn't happen. After a while, the cops did emerge from the barn, but there was no person with them. However, one of the cops was carrying something. When I went to talk to them, I found myself somewhat embarrassed. The cops understood why I was scared before, but they still seemed amused. One of the cops was carrying a raven with him. It was the raven hiding out in the barn that was talking the whole time. They proved it by having him talk to me, and that was the voice that I had heard. It turns out that the raven was a pet that the previous tenants had, but it had gotten out. When they moved out, they thought that they would never see their pet again. Fortunately, we were able to get the raven back to them. I guess that is why the raven let the police officers pick him up, because it was something that he was used to. It may not seem too scary by the end of the story, but trust me, when you are somewhere that you are sure you are by yourself, and you hear a strange voice saying hello to you, it will scare the hell out of you too. Number 2. Camp. My scary story took place when I was at summer camp. It was something that I went to every summer growing up, for a little more than 3 weeks. I always had fun there, and it was the highlight of my summer. There were some kids from my area who also went to the camp with me, so I always had some friends when I was there. There were also some kids that I only saw each year when I went there, but I had been going so many times that I knew most of the regulars pretty well. But one year, in my early teen years, a new camper showed up. He was someone that I had never seen before. Plus, he was someone that I wished I had never met before. The kid was huge, and he was a real jerk, and he got off on being a really horrible bully. His name was Rex. Literally, it was the only person in my entire life that I had ever met named Rex. I don't know why, but Rex took to me pretty badly. I wasn't really ever bullied in my neighborhood or in school, so Rex was really the first real bully that I'd ever come across in my life, and he loved making fun of me. For the most part, it wasn't that bad. This was summer camp after all, so more often than not I was surrounded by a bunch of boys my age who knew me, and very often camp counselors as well, so I didn't come across Rex too often. I was very fortunate that he also slept in a different cabin than I did, so I was safe most of the time. But bullies are very often the kind of dicks who pick their times when they want to pick on their victims, and Rex was definitely no different than that. It was during a time and that we were all hanging out in the river by the camp swimming. All the cabins were together at that time, both the boys and the girls. I didn't see it coming, but at one point, someone grabbed me from behind and pushed me down, holding me under the water. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually breathed water into your lungs before, but it's a pretty painful situation. And I had no advance warning that Rex was behind me when he grabbed me and did this. So I inhaled a lot of water right away, and I didn't even struggle very much at all. I don't remember a whole lot of what went on, but I do remember the pain, and I do remember the panic, before there was no memory at all. The camp counselors were able to get to me before it was too late. I mean, I guess that is obvious since I'm telling the story. Apparently they did CPR on me, and they revived me, but I have no memory of that at all. My first memory after all of that was being in the hospital, with my mom explaining what happened. Now, this happened a very long time ago, so my memory about everything that happened is not very clear. For that I apologize. But I know that I never saw Rex again. I don't know what the consequences were for him, but I hope they were severe. Number 3. Discovery. I used to go and spend time at my friend's house often when I was growing up. We both met in school and we were friends from a very young age. However, whereas I lived in town, he lived in a completely rural area. At a certain age, we began having weekend sleepovers. Our parents didn't drive us over. We would just each take the other's bus home from school on a Friday afternoon. And we would be doing this sort of thing very regularly for most of our entire childhood. My buddy, Carl was his name, and I used to explore the countryside that surrounded the house he grew up in. By the time we were in our teens, we were very familiar with it, and actually quite bored with it too. We had been out hiking in the area for so many times. There weren't any areas that we didn't know by heart. When we were 14 years old, however, we had a new experience. One of our mutual friends, who was 15, was driving his dad's old pickup truck ever since his dad got a new vehicle. He didn't have a license, but as long as we stayed in the rural areas, he wouldn't get in trouble for driving. And although it was a thrill enough to just be sitting in the back bed of the truck, drinking a beer that we had stolen from Carl's dad, we also wanted to explore areas that we hadn't had the chances to before. So about 4 of us got together early on one Saturday morning, and we went driving way out in the hills. We were looking for some place that was far out as we could find. We would then be exploring what we considered unknown territory. We drove around a lot, trying to find some of the deepest woods that we could find, yet still accessed by road. We ended up driving off-road when the road ended, but still it looked like other vehicles had driven along that ground. We figured that would make it safe to do so. Eventually, though, we went ahead and stopped the truck when the trees got too thick to really drive any further. This was easily the furthest out in the country I had ever been in my life, but that excited rather than scared me. This gave us a completely new area to look around in. The four of us strayed apart from each other, while mostly staying together. We made sure that all of us were in vocal range of each other. We rarely would get out of each other's sight either. We didn't really know what we were looking for, only that we were indeed out there, looking for something. I don't know how long we were out there before Carl and I heard one of the other boys yelp. It was a weird noise that he made, and it sounded like he was in distress. At that moment he was out of sight, so we had to rush over to where we thought that we heard his yelp come from. All three of us went over the hill that we were hiking on and stopped when we saw what made our friend call out. There were at least 7 full-grown adults dressed in camouflage, sitting in a camp on the side of the hill. They looked like they were actual military guys, though, and not just a bunch of backwoods guys pretending like they were. One of the guys was holding our friend, who had yelped, with her hand over his mouth. The three of us reacted poorly. We were about to turn around and start running. I guess we selfishly only wanted to protect ourselves. But we didn't even get a chance to perform this cowardly act. Several of the military guys pulled guns on us, and that stopped us in our tracks. They ordered us over to their camp, and the three of us, scared to death that we were going to get shot, complied. I didn't know what to do, but I was terrified. I was just going to do whatever these possible soldiers told me to do, in hopes that I wasn't going to get shot or killed. The soldiers ordered the four of us over there and into one of the tents that they had set up. They didn't tie us up or anything, but one of them told us that they had better not hear a peep out of us, or that we would regret it. He definitely spoke with an accent, but it wasn't one that I recognized, or even nowadays could guess what it was. The four of us sat in the tent terrified. We heard some talking going on outside of the tent, but we were unable to make out what was being talked about. Carl kept trying to whisper about trying to find a way out, but we shushed him. Finding a way out of there, and getting away from 7 soldiers with guns, wasn't going to be easy. Eventually they blindfolded all 4 of us, and then tied our hands behind our backs. I was absolutely sure that they were going to kill us. They took us and began guiding us away from the camp. Although, I assumed they had no idea which direction they had taken us off to. The only thing I could tell was that they were guiding us downhill. Eventually they put us all in the back of a vehicle and began driving. It was at least an hour's worth of driving before they stopped. At one point, after they stopped us, and then finally began untying our hands, and the blindfolds were removed, we noticed that we were in the back of our friend's truck. The guy untying us, the guy with the accent, told us to get in the truck and do our best to forget anything that we saw that day. He said the reason he was letting us live was that they couldn't have people searching for missing children out in the woods, but if we knew what was best for us, we wouldn't tell anyone anything. We drove off immediately. They had driven the truck along with a truck of their own towards an unfamiliar area. We then had to find out where we were and try to drive back home. We talked about what we had seen, but none of us were really sure. We weren't sure if they were American troops, foreign troops, or just members of some backwoods militia. We didn't know what to do, but Carl and I kept it to ourselves. I'm not sure about the other 2 guys, though. Carl and I figured the guy's advice was quite sound. We were willing to do our best just to forget about them. Well, this was back in the 70s, and Carl and I are still friends. We still don't know whatever happened to the other 2 guys, though. We have told this story many times since. We figure there's no chance we'd be in danger now. But we both really thought we were going to die back then. This is a bonus story that does not take place in the country. It has appeared on my Patreon, first as a paid story, and then I freed it for everybody. But I figured if I made it free for everybody on Patreon, I should go ahead and put it at the end of one of these videos. Dumpster. There was a time when I was moving a lot, month to month, because I was having some issues. By the time I had largely grown out of the issues, I began looking for a place that I could afford, that wasn't too far from where I was going to school. I was able to find a place in the city, and since I went to school in the city, that worked out well. Still, The apartment I rented a room in was not terribly close to the school, so I spent a lot of time on public transportation. I wasn't one for walking through alleys much, but the closest bus stop to my apartment building was a couple streets down from the one that I lived on. Since I spent so much time at school and on public transportation, I would walk through an alley to get to the back entrance of my building. This was quicker than going down to another street and taking the long way around. So although I wasn't really fond of the alleys, it made it much quicker to find my way home. I had probably been doing this for about 2 months or so when I had a really late night at school. I took a lot of classes on Tuesdays, so I wouldn't have to go to class every day. The only bad thing about it is that I would often not even get home until after midnight. Walking through an alley that late at night was not really the greatest experience that one could have. This night was really cold and it had been snowing. I hated snowy days in the city because that just made it really creepier. It made it much scarier walking through the alleys as well, which is likely obvious. This night I was walking, and as I was walking past one of the dumpsters, I heard a rapid knocking sound coming from one of them. It startled me because it didn't sound like something had fallen or broken. It was as if someone or something was knocking on the inside of one of the dumpsters. I looked over at the dumpster for a moment before figuring it was just a raccoon or something that was foraging for a meal, so I went on to resume walking toward my apartment when I heard it again. It was the exact same number of knocks as before, which was pretty creepy, but I didn't want to take the time to think about it, and I continued on my way to my apartment building. I had just entered the gate of the apartment building when I began rethinking about what I had heard. I can't explain it, but there was something that was bugging me about it. I kept wondering what had been making that noise. I wondered if my curiosity would bug me the rest of the night if I hadn't gone back to look. Sighing, I decided to go back and check out the dumpster. I thought it was possible maybe a cat or something had gotten into it and was trying to get out. I definitely didn't want a kitty to be stuck in some refuge, so I went back to check it out. I approached the dumpster and went up to lift the lid off it. Snow had been built up on it, so I had to sweep it off first. I did, and then I lifted up the lid, expecting a cat to jump out at me. Instead, I saw a bloody man inside of the dumpster. He looked like he was barely alive, and he looked up at me as I opened the lid. I almost fell down on my butt, but fortunately I didn't. The man looked like he could barely move. I quickly got my phone out and called 911, in no way understanding what was happening. I found out later that the man had been attacked while walking through the alley and dumped in the dumpster. He had no idea who the attackers were. It seemed like some random attack. It made me wonder if it could have happened to me any time that I had been walking through that alley, and I decided I wouldn't be doing that anymore. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. As always, I need to thank my paid Patreon members, my 2 VIP members, Pixie 8 and Chiamerah Cat, my other paid members, Tracy Sellars, Chronic J, and Heidi H. I'm sorry this video took so long to come out. I'd been a little sick here and there. I'm doing alright now. My voice yesterday was really weird. It was really off. I think it still sounds a little off, but I didn't want to wait any longer to get this video out. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed the bonus story. I promise it won't be this long before the next video comes out. So what I'd like to do now is thank all my free Patreon members. If you're not a member of my Patreon, remember, you can join as a free member. So here we have Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, Stinking Ooze, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, and Evil Black Cat. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.